Hello and welcome to Rural Empires. Today I have with me my dad, Josh Arnold, and then also Mr. John Cooper, who's going to be our interview subject today. Our main focus is going to be on Mr. John, just asking him some questions, how he got started on building his own empire. He's not only in the real estate field, but he comes from another background that works hand in hand with the real estate field and once again allows him to grow his empire. So with that, John, I'll let you introduce yourself and just welcome to the channel.
Hello, my name's John Cooper. I reside in a small community, Milan, Tennessee. Born and raised in West Tennessee. Been here all my life. I love this area. My background's in finance, traditional finance. Graduated from the University of Tennessee back in '09. So Bachelor of Science in Business Administration with a concentration in finance. And early on in my education, I just gravitated to the business field. It was very stimulating to my mind, and I just felt drawn to that, and eventually found myself involved in the real estate world, which we'll share some more about as we get into the interview.
Now you're about 45 minutes down the road, right? Is where you grew up, in a smaller town than really where we're at.
Right. So Parsons, Tennessee, Decaturville, Tennessee is the county seat over there. That's where I graduated high school. As I was evaluating my college decision, I found my way to Martin, and then ultimately, as I started my career, I found my way to Union City, Tennessee. So we have sister locations in Union City, and then also now in Milan. I run a wealth franchise, sort of a family office style wealth franchise, where we offer various investing and comprehensive, financial planning and also tax strategy.
Well, I think that's a good start and kind of a good background. So now I have some questions for you. Me getting started in my real estate and investing journey. I always like not only asking my dad and hearing his opinions, but also others that, he works alongside, because it's good to get those different opinions and different views, especially someone in another field looking outside in almost. So a question I just want to ask is, you've kind of shared your journey and experiences, but can you share how those experiences have led you particularly in rural markets, and how that's gotten where you are today?
Sure. So early on in my career in finance, I took an interest in residential real estate investing specifically. One of the bits of the thesis I had going in was that West Tennessee was growing relative to other areas pretty rapidly as far as population growth, right? It being a small kind of emerging market, I just saw that population tended to be trending upward, and that really sparked my interest in real estate as an asset class. Coming from traditional finance, there are some traded real estate vehicles and things like that, but getting into rural real estate, specifically residential investing, is something that I had on my mind. At that point in time, this was 2012, going into 2013, my wife and I, of course, I'm a father to two small children at home. I'm a girl dad, so they keep me busy. But early on in our marriage, Kyle and I, we had decided to purchase our first home. In my mind, I thought it was worthwhile to consider buying a property that was affordable at that point in time, and then later on converting it to a rental for long term. So the live-in and rent strategy was how I really first got invested in my rural market. Many of those properties, which I repeated that strategy again and again, I still hold today, and hopefully can hold for the long term with income generation. So that population growth was on my mind, and also the rate at which consumers were coming into this market for its relative affordability. Another thing that caught my eye, at that time we didn't have record inflation like we've experienced over the last 24 months. Inflation was more muted, but still you could feel the presence of inflation and prices drifting higher for consumer goods and, of course, real estate. So in business school, they often taught you the merits of equities, of course, but also real estate specifically for its ability to hedge inflation over time and protect your purchasing power. So that was really what kind of led me to first initially investing in the rural market.
And you talk about the population increase in these smaller towns, and I mean, we've definitely seen that, especially now that Ford, which we've talked about in other YouTube videos, how that they're coming in and putting all this money and bringing all these people. And like you said, that not only helps you on your, wealth management and finance side, but also on your real estate side, being able to get those houses before all these people come in and, kind of getting ahead of the market per se. Next thing I want to ask you about is, I know I've heard my dad's side of the story of how you and him have met, but I wanted to hear your side and how that went down.
Sure. So going back to that 2012, 2013 time frame, had pretty much decided that we wanted to buy a house, and I thought, maybe it would be an opportunity to also set myself up for long-term investing. So we go looking for a house. My wife had done some research while I was working and trying to run our practice, and she came across this individual that was talked very positively about in our local community, and that individual was Josh Arnold. I recall early on in one of our first interactions, he basically said, jump in the Jeep, let's go. Something that we've done many times since as our relationship has evolved there. But he basically helped us find a home that met our criteria. It was within our budget. It was in the area that we needed it to be at that point in time. We were working, my wife and I, in different locations, so we needed a spot that was sort of in the middle of our work location. So it met all the criteria that we were looking for, and we put an offer in, and we worked through, advice of our realtor, and we ended up winning that bid. And today that home continues to be in my portfolio. I'm always a believer in heeding good counsel and listening to those that I trust and that have a good track record around me. And I laughed at the time when Mr. Arnold had said, this home is going to rent basically like clockwork. Don't worry about it. Because getting into the asset class initially, there's a fair level of just timidity, concern. Is this going to work? Am I going to make a mistake? Am I going to mess myself up? So through good counsel, I was able to receive good advice. And that was a very fortuitous bit of advice, because I don't think that property has missed a single month's rent in over a decade of holding it.
And that's the dream right there. That's what you want every property to be like that.
They don't always work that well. I wish that they all worked that well. There are, of course, challenges in investing. It's not always easy, but if you can stick with it and you can see a clear vision of what the future may hold, it can work for you.
And there's kind of one thing I wanted to touch up on right there. You talked about, kind of being timid first getting into the asset class. And I think that's something a lot of people face out there when they're looking at investing in real estate. And my question to you is do you believe that's kind of maybe because you had the finance background and your mindset was to, break it down and evaluate before you go into it, or what? And how did you overcome that really?
My kind of birth into the industry was really, at the time, it looked like a bad opportunity, or it looked like one of the worst financial setups, because I came into the industry graduating out of the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, and all of the problems that brought for our economy.
The real estate crash.
That's right. It was almost the bottom of the Great Recession at that point in time when I'd graduated in early 2009. So that really shaped my thinking, and it still shapes many young investors today's attitude towards risk, right? Many have been scarred by that tumultuous time frame, but with the clarity of hindsight, that not only was a blessing, it was one of the best opportunities for us to invest and to acquire assets at an attractive price. And I see this again and again in equity and stock investing. Many times when we see our 401ks, our balances drop temporarily, we do face that with concern or being timid. And really, we should view that through a different lens. And those temporary drops are opportunities to enter, right? It would reinforce just the thought process of being long-term minded. It's hard to do. Most folks are looking for that paycheck next Friday, and they're not focused on the next 5, 10, 15 years out. You very much have to keep in mind that investing is a process, whether we're talking about residential real estate or commercial real estate or equities or fixed income, whatever it is. It takes foresight and it takes a fairly long-term mindset. And if you can mold your mind to think in decade-long intervals, it will give you more success in the longer term. It's hard to do, but if you can continually coach yourself and of course listen to the good counsel and others that you keep around you, it will ultimately lead to a prosperous portfolio for you.
I mean, that's a great point. It is something that you read in books also, is like having that long-term mindset, being able to think in decades. And that is such a hard thing to do, especially when you're in the now and then you feel like you have so much on top of you that you got to get done. But I do like the way you said that and how you touched on that. Another thing I wanted to ask, so I know that you said when you first kind of started out, the mindset when you were investing was, maybe live in the house and then rent it out afterwards. Am I understanding that right?
That live-in and rent strategy was really how I built the core of my portfolio early on. That does take a little bit of sacrifice because you got to be comfortable moving more than average. Most young consumers move every 2 to 3, maybe 5 years anyway. But early on, if you can buy one of the main advantages there is you can get owner-occupied financing terms, right? Which usually has a lower APR in the conventional mortgage market, right? So if you can attain that great financing by living in it for 2 years, and most look at your mortgage, of course, and adhere to all the rules there. But as long as your mortgage company will allow for you to rent it after a 2-year period, for example, I found that to be a great strategy to lower the cost of financing, enter some of these properties at an attractive price, and then ultimately convert them to an income-producing property once you move on. I was able to do that about 3 times, three or four times. I didn't move a lot early on. I think we moved 6 times in about 13 years, but I would still do that over again. I got to work on some of those properties, improve some of those properties, collaborate with my local professionals, realtors, repairmen, plumbers, roofers, and all that stuff, and build out kind of a Rolodex of contacts, which would ultimately help me to manage a larger portfolio of income-producing properties.
Absolutely, and that's what we appreciate at Rural Empires, is building those relationships and having collaboration between all your, like you said, your roofers, your plumbers, your builders, all those, building those relationships. And, I really like that strategy. I don't know if that's something that we've ever really talked about as much or focused on, but I mean, that's a great strategy, especially for someone who's, maybe they're looking to just get into it slow and steady, get in, buy their first house, having the foresight of, hey, I'm going to maybe rent this out in 2 years and, move to another. But if you're able to look at that and see that and have that mindset, and then it's not as big of a risk also because you're the one living in the house, getting that steady flow, and then you get the renter to come in and then make your payment and just continue that process. Mm-hmm. I mean, that just kind of sat with me well, and definitely a strategy that works, obviously, because you made it to where you are.
2 things I would share there. So there's the buy and hold strategy can be implemented using that same strategy, but also to sell, because the way that currently the tax structure is set up is that if you make less than, $500,000 a year, you can make up to a $500,000 profit without having to pay capital gains income tax on the sale of your personal home if you've resided in it for 2 years.
2 out of the last 5. That's exactly correct.
My wife and I, to share by practice that while you were there, but just not thinking about it, we moved 5 times in 9 years.
Yeah.
The last one that we moved from, I kept. So that was the only one that I didn't capitalize on the flip, utilizing, which each time when I would flip it after 2 years of living there, I was taking huge leaps in equity that would be built up through the appreciation. And at the time, and there was such great advantages on writing off the interest of your home, and being young and coming up was just a huge advantage that allowed me to leapfrog my success of being able to profit, the advantage of the tax benefits, and then giving me leverage going forward.
Sorry, I'm just kind of sitting here. I've already got my mind stirring about the one we're working on. I'm like, man, that's where my mind goes to. But where I wanted to get to with that, you know, breaking down that process kind of is how that's changed as you've evolved and as you've become more successful in the rural market, how that strategy has changed.
Early on, live in and rent was kind of at the core of my strategy. Once I got the ball rolling, I was able to then start to bite off some bigger chunks, if you will. I've always been one that I like to emulate the successes of those that I see around me. I'm not trying to recreate the wheel, so to speak. Observe your environment, keep your antennas up, as we often say, right?
That's right.
Out of that first home purchase that my realtor was, able to help me with, we began to talk about, educate ourselves on the asset class a little bit further. I'd been bitten by the bug, you might say, at that point. And I observed early on a group of professionals running a realty firm and property management company, and just was able to observe the successes that they were having, and opportunities arose, right? Especially over a decade-long period, there's transactions and things that will happen. And if you can position yourself to be on the beneficiary end of those bright minds around you, right? Collaborating, as we said before. So ultimately, that relationship led to the ability to identify some larger deals, was able to buy some baskets of single-family residential, eventually step into the commercial market. So started slow, started very conservative and steady, and then was able to kind of up my capital investment, and then also my risk appetite was able to grow in time with my level of comfort in the asset class. Fast forward, been able to grow my portfolio to, we've bought and sold some. I've trimmed a few out of the portfolio and rotated up to some bigger deals over the last few years. But at the peak of my portfolio, I think we'd had about 30 total units, whether individually owned or in partnership, owned with other investors as a collaborative sort of partnership. So once you get that ball rolling, and if you continue to monitor and continue to manage it, it will just continue to grow, and you'll see some success there, I would say.
And I like how you describe getting into it, because a lot of people, say, well, investing, that's risky. Walking outside and getting in my car and driving down the road's a risk, technically, but it's a calculated risk, right? You started slow, something that you felt more comfortable and were more sure that was going to come to pass, and then slowly biting off bigger chunks, and then, eventually even getting to a commercial deal, that's definitely a bigger chunk. If you could describe either one of your most successful investments or, a few, whatever you think.
So again, my background being in finance, I kind of have my foot in two different worlds here, two different asset classes. Some of our most successful investments have been baskets of stocks. often get the question, everyone likes to focus on individual stocks. It's what's in the finance media, it's what's on the news. And I often get the question, well, what stock do I buy, today? And I often kind of chuckle and say to my clients, well, the answer is all of them. It's almost always all of them. That's not the most glamorous answer. It's not what people are looking for. They're looking for the next NVIDIA or the next Apple or the next Google or Amazon. But instead of trying to find the needle in the haystack, just buy the whole haystack is basically the answer. So some of my most successful investments have been things like the NASDAQ 100 or the S&P 500, a global basket of diversified stocks. As far as the real estate asset class is concerned, I remember one of our most successful investments was a commercial strip center that we were able to acquire in partnership, of course. Like to collaborate again. We were able to buy that property for $1.2 million. We were able, through forced appreciation techniques such as new lease negotiation, finding more valuable or higher value tenants, improving the property, rehabbing the property, new roof, for example, and then also just effective management of that property. We're then able to sell it for $2.1 million about 3 years later. We didn't go into that deal thinking that it was going to be a medium-term flip, but the opportunity and the economic climate with rates, just the timing ended up being pretty good, and we were able to sell that property in about 3 years' time at a substantial profit and collected $250,000 a year in rental income along that holding period. So that one is vivid in my mind. They're not all triples or home runs like that one was. You've got to set your expectations correctly. There will be some challenges along the way, but if you get invested in an asset class and you work it and you do the things, you care for it, it will work over time. You mentioned a comment about it's all risky, right? I think Jim Rohn, which we love, he fires me up. I think he said that, it's all risky, right? But I think what you'll see in time is that the riskier thing is choosing not to invest. It's sitting on your hands and it's doing nothing. It's a competitive landscape out there, and you've got to position yourself to be on the receiving end of some sort of income stream, whatever asset class that is.
When you're talking about asset classes, one of the things that I respect is that each one has its own value, and there's particular tactics and strategies that can be implemented, but ultimately the principles and the essence of how you frame your mindset and position yourself in studying that asset class out and making a commitment to growing in that. I mean, if you go to the gym, the first day you get there, the bar is going to seem heavy and it's going to seem painful after the first workout. But once you get into the process and the habit of studying within that asset class, your experience in having some falters and some trips, picking yourself up, going back into the game, I think has a lot of value to it. But with your wisdom and experience in the different asset classes and overseeing it from a financial planning and coaching, so to speak, to your clients, would you say that there is any such thing as totally passive income?
Totally passive, there's no such thing. Even a stock portfolio, which I would say is probably the most passive asset that you can get, especially if you use a professional advisor who's going to monitor and measure and manage that portfolio for you, it's mostly passive. But even then, it requires some care by the owner, the investor.
Managing the planner, managing the advisor.
Checking in on your advisor, checking your mail, getting your taxes done and receiving those tax documents, which are automatically going to be sent out to you. Real estate, of course, has its own active responsibilities within that passive, asset class. You do got to interact with those professionals, those repairmen, those realtors. You got to pay your property taxes. You got to get those bills paid. But no, I would say that there is no truly 100% passive asset class, and you need to set your expectations accordingly around that. Get engaged in there. Get in there and get involved. It's the best education that you can receive. I loved business school and I learned a lot there, but I've learned more in doing all the things and running business and owning real estate by being involved, by being active. You want that. It's as much of a blessing as it is. Sometimes it can seem like a curse. Work can be tough sometimes, but it's more of a blessing than it is a curse.
I think an example of that, to kind of get off script for a second, but just I think an experience this week would be fresh on your mind. I think got his first summons on a property that we jointly own together.
That's right.
Won't go into detail for potential legal matters, but just I think that shook your tree a little bit. And he called me. I'm on vacation, and I laughed, and I was like, he's like, well, now this is lawsuit, and I'm like, part of being in business is being exposed and just understanding that there's no free lunch. Every asset class, every investment carries with it a polarity. There's a positive and there's a negative. If you're in business, I think Johnny's the nicest guy on the planet, and I think we try to do things just and upright, make sure that the properties are tended to and well maintained. But if somebody slips on the banana peel out in your parking lot, they sue you. When those legal documents come in, they rattle your internal cage a little bit. Well, I'm just going to get out of real estate. I mean, this is, am I exposed? And I think I shared with John. I said, well, we'll just call our insurance. I mean, that's what we pay general liability insurance for. And I think he feels better about that. I'd like to kind of let him speak for himself. But this is a real-time, right now example of even an experienced investor, someone who's been in the game over a decade, got his first legal thing arise.
Sure.
And the only way one can get comfortable in that scenario is having experienced and gone through that. Well, I've had hundreds and hundreds of two sides. Sometimes I'm the one that is the one trying to litigate and collect on a debt owed or a damage made to my property. And then sometimes it's those who feel that they've been wronged on your property or investing in whatever asset class that it is. And so if you don't mind, share a little bit about that emotion that had to be overcome and those mental challenges that you faced.
Sure. I'll talk about the emotion a little bit. Also, just there's so many takeaways from that, but setting your expectations properly. Be prepared for those storms that are going to come. This is a very small storm. It's nothing that's ultimately going to cause major problems in the long term. We'll just keep on keeping on, but set those expectations properly. There will be failures. There will be investments that will go down at time. There'll be some losers in the portfolio. Just set your expectations properly on the front end, and it's going to enable you to run that portfolio more effectively in the longer term. But I've always been one where I want A pluses on the scorecard. I don't want a single spot or blemish. But again, going back, that's not a realistic expectation. It's not realistic. There's going to be some B minuses on there, and that's okay. You're still passing. I've personally never had a legal event like that in my career. Been doing this for 11 years and never had a single event. And then that summons hits my doorstep, and it just makes your heart just sink. It just heart sink. Again,
somebody served your wife at home while you were away, and
that's right.
You were like, man, somebody just showed up at my home. a stranger and delivered legal documents to my wife, who I'm sure had her own level of concern when that arrived.
Actually, I think my wife handled it better than me. She said, "This is somebody looking for a handout. Don't worry about this." And here I was, just ready to make drastic measures. But after some time and thoughtfulness and prayer and counsel, listen to those that are senior in terms of experience and have done this and seen this 1,000 times, you really start to calm down and fall back into your groove. These are to be expected. It will happen, especially in, for-profit real estate. If there's profits to be had, there's potential threats out there that want a piece of that. And it's just something to expect. Use it as an opportunity to learn. You'll be stronger when the next event inevitably comes up. There will be more challenges. There will be more, dips in the market. There will be more bumps in the road, but they're just bumps in the road.
There's a couple of things I would just make note of. One is we're making light with a jovial attitude now, when a couple of days ago, less than a week ago, the vision was grim, having not seen or had that manifested before in your experience, but we still treat it very reverently. Let's be real clear. We're making light of our emotions, not of the situation. But with great prudence, immediately, we contacted our insurance agent. I'm doing some research just to look at our lease, reread our lease, to just be prudent and diligent to make sure that we're not going to speak dishonestly or without integrity about what our responsibilities were in the matter, and plan accordingly and make sure that we're using the right language when we're discussing with because our tenant actually is also being sued. And so that's just kind of the way that works. I would implement a sports analogy here, and that is, I love the Gatorade commercial where it goes through the list of all of the missed shots and lost games that Michael Jordan had in his career, which are tremendous. But nobody remembers those. Everybody thinks about the greatness of Michael Jordan, but how many times he took the game-winning shot and failed and missed it. But nobody's recalling those. Or how about the greatest baseball batting average is less than 500? That means they're successful less than 50% of the time. But yet they get paid hundreds of millions of dollars in their profession. Their profession being not being successful 65% of the time, but yet they have great results and rewards for being persistent and disciplined in their craft, which still gives them that inch, that compounded edge, which leads me into my next one. If you saw me write my note down, is another event when you had the property that I had sold you in Atwood. And after the first tenant moved out, who was already behind, maybe, several $1,000s behind in rent, and we had been, John's being Mr. Generous and trying to work with the unfortunate situation that the lady was in, the tenant was in, and then to compound that, as she was leaving after John's great generosity in the matter, she literally destroys the home. And when I mean destroys the home, I mean the insurance company had totaled it out. Well, I'll leave that to you, because I jumped ahead and kind of told ahead, but it looked like he was going to have to buy the house twice in 2 years.
So we'll talk about that. Before we leave that prior point, though, I want to double back and be sure, because I want to echo what you said about your sports analogy. And I would say a quote comes to mind from Bear Bryant. He said something like, "It's easy to beat most folks because most don't have a plan." Our plan in navigating that legal challenge with that summons, and then of course we'll talk about the legal challenge with that Atwood property, was well mapped out before that summons ever hit our doorstep. We got a top-notch lease in place. We monitor and manage the property. And then we were able to loop in the professionals, our top-notch insurance company, who has now already attained for us top-notch legal counsel, right? So tap into those resources that you have, that you've collaborated on, of course, and have a plan in place. You put out those fires before they begin by having a good plan in place, and most folks will not. They won't plan at all.
And where do you get those plans?
That's a challenging question. Let's talk about Atwood a little bit too, because that was one that was a challenge. Didn't have many challenges, mostly good experience leading up to that, but that was one of those properties where we did have the tenant just had a really rough time and fell into an unfortunate circumstance and unfortunately vandalized the property. So at first glance, this looks like a total, loser, but I come back to having the good plan in place first. We had already attained good insurance, which just so happened to cover, I didn't know it at that point in time, but reading into the fine print, it just so happened to cover a vandalism scenario. So what I thought was going to be a major loser in the portfolio actually was more of a break even. I was able to, at least make myself whole and make the needed repairs to the property because of that quality insurance that did cover that vandalism event. Again, one of those scenarios that at first glance was a big letdown and left me, somewhat emotional, but with the clarity of hindsight, it was okay. Just another bump in the road, get the proper protections in place. You hear lots of folks talk about LLCs and real estate investing. That seems to be the common wisdom. That's a fine way to invest. It protects you from liability, protects your personal assets, and separates those business assets from your personal. Another thing that I've found useful is to be sure that you've got an umbrella liability policy, whether or not you have an LLC. And for sure, if you don't have an LLC and you hold the properties in your personal name, be sure to have an umbrella liability policy, which will protect you from a event if something happens. Someone comes into the yard, breaks their leg, God forbid, and points the finger at you. It's a very sue-happy world that we're in, right? And you just got to be prepared for that. Plan ahead, get the protections in place on the front end, and it's going to help you in your real estate journey or your investing journey in general.
That was great, just listening to that going back and forth. I learned a lot right there. And two questions that I was planning on asking, but I feel like we've already answered them. I just want to touch on them. Is what qualities do you think are essential for someone looking to invest, and how have these traits helped you succeed? And the other being, in your career, you've also often faced complex decisions. Can you explain how you approach these decisions? And I feel like we've heard you speak on those a little bit, and the fact that planning ahead, having the resources and the top-notch people at your side when something does go bad, and then also having the foresight and being able to plan ahead for if something like that happens, and being able to have the emotional stability in the moment, I'm sure, to be able to go through that with wisdom and knowledge instead of just kind of running into it with, blindly, being able to break it down beforehand and pray on it and talk to your counselors on it. Is there anything else that you would add to that?
Motivation, of course. You've got to want it. So many don't have that innate motivation. So just get fired up about something, whatever it is you're doing. Just get motivated and entrench yourself in it. Get completely immersed in the environment that you're in. Another quality would be sacrifice. You have to be willing to do without now in exchange for future reward later. And that's a difficult quality to to possess, right? It's hard to save into that 401k or that Roth IRA. It's hard to set aside the money for your first down payment on an income producing property, but you must do it. You just have to do it. Take time to meditate on and to ultimately exemplify sacrifice, not only towards investing, but to those that are around you. You got to I have a heart for service, right? You know, especially with my wealth franchise, I love to see people succeed. I want to see them do well. I want them to see their money grow. I just want to help others. Sometimes you might be pro bono, right? It just having that heart for service and just doing that thing early on. And if you can plant those seeds, I believe that it will ultimately help you on the back end. There'll be some tasks that you'll do in the investing process that might not have an immediate return. You need to be doing the things that are going to have a measurable return in the long term. And again, have that long-term mindset, not that short-term mindset.
And I think just to add on to that, another way to put that is opportunity cost, being able to sustain one way in order to pursue something else, or weighing those odds out and, you know, really taking time to consider how you see yourself and where you want to be. And then also just being able to reflect on that. So I think that's great. Deb, were you about to add on to?
I would implement this thought for these challenges that we're talking about with the legal matter or with the property in Atwood where someone greatly vandalized. It was not what John knew when he faced those. It was who he knew, who was great at what they do and their experience in what they had. And he already had a treasure trove of associations and acquaintances that had experience in different fields that lended him great counsel. I think in Proverbs 15 and 22, I would read that without counsel, purposes are disappointed. But in the multitude of counselors, they are established. And then in Proverbs 24, in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. And so I think who you associate with and building that team around you, you've already been alluding to that because you talk about the professionals that were around you with your experts in insurance and in legal and in real estate, from property management to finding and breaking down a property. And that's in any asset class, to be establishing yourself. And what we believe is in a rural community, they're easier to identify and they're easier to approach, which we think is a rural advantage. We believe that's part of the empire's edge. I mean, the reason that we are having this interview today, it's under the theme of the empire's edge and the rural empire's edge. In a rural community, it's a little bit easier to identify those that are having great success, and it's easier to identify those stories and to know who's been down that path before. And so what we coach here is being able to build those relationships early while you're being prudent and you're being diligent in what you're doing. You want to be aggressive about establishing relationships early with mentors and counselors to give yourself the strength you need in going into the unknowns. You're going to have something new happen. I mean, I've been doing it 20 years and I'm never surprised by the fact that I'm surprised. Like in the beginning, I would think I had it all figured out. You know, I've read every book and I've done all this, but then the further I got in my growth of understanding and knowledge, the greater understanding of the gap that there is in what I think I know, and then what I can face and what I'll have to deal with. But when you have built those relationships of wise counselors within your ecosystem and your sphere of influence, I think that is the greatest edge that one can get. There being three sides to the coin. I've shared this before. There's the heads, there's the tail, and there's the edge. The edge is what gives you the greatest advantage in investing in business in rural communities and in real estate. I think the wise counselors that you surround yourself with. And the best way to do that is to be of value yourself, is to establish what you're great at, what you're prudent at, what you're diligent in. John's in the wealth planning and in the tax strategy, and I go to John all the time and just beat him up with all that I can, suck the life out of his experiences so that I can get an edge in my field to what I'm doing. And I know he utilizes that himself.
I love that, because me and Harrison, when we're going through making these questions, we're wanting to make questions that'll answer questions that we have, stuff that when we're looking at investing, maybe that we're not 100% on or want more guidance on. Just going through these questions. And one of our questions is, I'm sure you've heard that you're the average of your 5 closest friends. How do you go about navigating those relationships? And I think it was just answered right here, associating yourself with the counselors who have the wisdom and experience and knowledge to get you through what you're going through at this time. And I think just the reason we were talking about it, is because, especially right now in my life, in the transition of high school, college, into the more, adult life, just my friends, it's like I love my friends more than anything in the world, but sometimes we're not aligned in what we wanted to do and what our future looks like. And so, yes, that's a struggle, but it's also a realistic fact that you are the average of your closest 5 friends. And if you want to grow or be better, then you need to surround yourself with another group. And sometimes I think it's just speaking it to myself, because that's a hard saying, but I feel like it's also a real saying that needs to be pointed out. So I did appreciate that. And if y'all had anything else,
I would even implement, there's 2 sides, again, to that coin. There is associating with those who have obtained a level of success in the field you're in that you want to associate with, and then in associated fields or relative fields also to, whether it be insurance or property management or banking or construction. Like, all of those are different fields as it would apply to real estate. The same would be in the financial world with great CPAs and tax strategists, as well as those who are great at individual stocks and do have experience, because we're going to face those, but those who have the wisdom of the basket investing and the basket stocks. So you have that. But then there is the other side of the coin. It's having the attitude of gratitude and realizing that you've been helped, you've been tendered by those in that sphere of influence, and always looking to teach someone else and bring someone else into that circle that is youthful. And I can tell you, just from my own personal experience, I see great joy in the men and women who have been in my life, who have played such a huge role in me growing in success over the last couple of decades. And what a joy it is to pass that on, to pass that torch on. Each one teach one. If you're growing in your success, I know John is doing it. He's building a team now. And as he's building his practice further and further, and expanding in franchises and bringing in new counselors and advisors within his practice and teaching those up and coaching those up, I see that happen within his business, and what a joy that is. I know that Mr. Randy and is it Hancock?
Fred Hancock
had played a role in teaching the young whippersnapper that, was just coming out of college. Johnny's pretty good, sound, conservative guy, but he's a human being. There's a lot of naivety and youthful ignorance and lack of humility because you're trying to find, elbow your way into a room, so to speak. But they took the opportunity to lift up, encourage, and teach and counsel him through that. And he was ready and willing to receive that coaching, and I'm sure oftentimes even chastisements, that wise rebukes that would allow him to learn from those stripes, so to speak, and then be ready. And I know the joy that I feel in my heart when I know you're my son, so it's a little bit, that maybe has more a natural and biological attachment. But even a stranger, seeing someone come into our community and being blessed to be a part of watching them grow and knowing that I was able to help them navigate through a real tough time in their life and or get their first home. I mean, so those things are just really impactful items that I would feel negligent if we didn't share about the two-sidedness of that coin, both trying to find those that have greater success than you do and learn from their wisdom, and then passing that torch down to others and not just trying to hoard it for yourself. Like, how successful can I be? But taking the time to set aside and teach someone else. The character of a person is found in how that they treat those that can do nothing for them, and always being ready and standing on the ready and in a watchful way, those in your rural communities, and how that you can share and pass down. And no matter what level you're at, there's something that you can pass down to someone who's not at that level yet. And there's always something to learn, because there's somebody that's at a higher level of success than you are. Being humble enough to receive the one that's at the level you're not, and being willing to distribute that counsel to someone that's maybe not at your level as well.
And that's great, because we also talk about that we talked about that before here on the channel. Just especially, I think about it a lot, being young, but also knowing that there are people out there besides you. I mean, yes, being my father and a great person to mentor me through the real estate field, and also my granddad, but there's other people out there who they want to help out the younger people in their field. They want to teach them, they want to help them. But on my side of things, I got to be willing to get the help and willing to be mentored and willing to get, corrected. And then also just being able to decipher through that. It's a hard thing to wrap your mind around, but if you can and realize that there are people who want to help you, and just being motivated every day to come in. I mean, I guarantee you, I feel like you'd like somebody who's excited and ready to go and, 100%, 110%, and they may mess everything up, but they're going and they're learning and they're correcting themselves, versus someone who, they may be the smartest person in the world, but they come in, head down, dragging their feet. You tell them to do something and they get it done, completely right. But at the same time, their attitude and their intensity of the situation, it makes a difference.
I share be on purpose, and there is no business that is not in the business of attitudes. Every business is an attitude business. Every principle is a microcosm of other principles. When we share about Michael Jordan, what we're doing is we're looking at someone who has experienced, who has implemented principles within his business of basketball, and how that I can apply those to the business of real estate, or they can be applied to the business of wealth management. And so we feed off those, and we're able to share. And I think that's just awesome.
Your discussion reminds me of another quote, which I like to reflect upon. I think it's from Anthony Hopkins. He said 90% of success is just showing up. If you put yourself in a position to be there, opportunities tend to arise. I think back to my college days, and many would struggle, many would flunk out, a lot didn't make it. Just showing up, and in particular, sit on the front row and show up, is a recipe to get through college, in my opinion. If you can be there, even if you're not the most studious behind the scenes and maybe you don't complete every assignment on time, but just put that butt in that seat every time, it's hard to fail sometimes if you show up, if you are there and on purpose.
I preach, be a participator.
Yeah.
Be a participator. I have so many shortcomings and weaknesses that have been overlooked by my blessing and willingness to participate. And Art Williams, who founded A.L. Williams and was just a high school football coach in Georgia, become a multi-billionaire. And that statement, I love watching that video when I need to get my energy built up. And he says, just 9 words is all you need to success. And those 9 words are, all you can do is all you can do. Now, the other side of that coin is, or the final portion of that is, but all you can do is enough. Now, all you can do is a long statement. If you really meditate through that statement, what is all? Well, you can participate. You can participate. Jim Rohn says it this way: getting rich is easy. Getting rich is easy. Now, how do I define easy? Something I can do. Something I can do. One of my business partners, Walker Huey, he always gets tickled that I listen to a lot of men that are dead corporally, but their legacy is living on within me. I'm able to get free on YouTube University, and I can participate and watch videos from 1970s and 80s and even earlier than that from the Earl Nightingales, and just get so fired up and go into my day with such optimistic thinking. And the pessimist may be right in the end. At least the optimist can enjoy getting there. I mean, yes, things may go awry. It may fail. It may fail. But why come in with that attitude trying to get there?
And I think, it goes back to what John said. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. It's not some secret formula or new hot thing that's out that, makes everybody rich and wealthy. It's just consistency and doing the same things over and over, getting up every day, motivated, planning out for the things that may happen, but also not being scared of them. Also being ready to handle those bumps in the road emotionally and with the, resources behind your back to help you get through that. How do you balance long-term and short-term strategies in your investments? And then also, timing can be crucial in real estate. And how do you decide when the right time to sell an investment is?
As often is the case in personal finance, it really depends. It just depends on the circumstances that you're facing at that point in time. I would go back and just kind of emphasize again that my strategy has been and will continue to be that the best money in real estate or in stocks is made on the long end. You really have to buy and hold for a long period of time to get the big payoff. It's tempting to ring that register in the short run when you've got short-term profits. Remember, short-term capital gains are taxed at a higher rate than long-term capital gains. If you can hold that property for 365 days or more, you're going to have an embedded tax benefit there. Don't let the tax tail wave the investment dog necessarily, but be mindful of the impact on taxes. The IRS is our partner in a sense in some of these asset classes, and we'd like to hopefully minimize the portion that stays in your pocket and minimize the portion that goes in theirs. But long term is my core thesis on investing in these. I want to hold these properties for 5, 10, 15, maybe even a lifetime. But there are situations in which you do have to balance that short-term decision within the context of your longer-term plan. We talked a little bit earlier about some of those properties that have been sold because the climate was right. The timing was good, right? Also, another strategy that can help you make a short-term decision to benefit in the long term is the time to rotate up or to roll up, right? You'll get to a point in your investing journey to where maybe you want to increase the average, quality of your rental portfolio. You want to sell some C-grade properties and rotate up to some A-grade properties, right? That would be a scenario where you'd have to maybe make the short-term decision to ring the register, sell some of those at a profit, and then take those proceeds and rotate into some higher quality portfolios. So it just depends, but there is situations where you will have some short-term decisions. I wouldn't say I have any regrets in investing, but I would say if I did have any regrets, it's the ones that I sold, not the ones that I bought, right? I can look back, and at that time, it looked like what was required, that short-term sell. With the clarity of hindsight, I look back and think I probably could have engineered a way to not have to sell those quality income producing properties. Real estate it's a scarce asset class. There's not going to be any more ground to build houses on our planet, right? That's another thing that influenced my decision making early on. So keep in mind that relative scarcity is something that needs to be evaluated. Don't get too short-term in your thinking. It's tempting to sell some stocks or some bonds or some real estate at a short-term profit, but come back to that long-term plan, that strategic, 10, 15, lifetime timetable, and make sure that short-term decision makes sense within the context of that.
There isn't always just one answer. It does depend on the timing, the resources, the circumstances that fall around that deal, and what you want to get out of it. Another question, which this is just more kind of interested stuff for me and Harrison also, is what is your favorite personal development book and how has it influenced you?
I jotted down a few. One that I would put in the vein of personal development would be The Productivity Project by Chris Bailey. Optimizing your biological prime time, they would call it. Being sure that you're setting your day up to be doing the high-value tasks when you're most effective at doing those high-value tasks. And also, it's not about how busy you are and how much you're doing. It's about how much you're setting yourself up to accomplish, right? We're in a very busy hustle bustle, especially with technology nowadays. We're getting shorter term in terms of our mindset and thinking with, TikTok and such like that. And all that's great, but keep in mind that it's about what you get accomplished on the long end. Don't lose your focus on the short-term, day-to-day stuff. A few more books that I jotted down. This isn't necessarily in the vein of self-improvement, but it definitely does have a lot of elements of that. Delivering Massive Value by Matthew Jarvis. That comes at it from the angle of more wealth management, but it definitely has lots of good nuggets in there. We talked about this earlier about the importance of delivering value and adding value to those that are around you and how important that is. Another one that I really enjoy, and this gets into more technical and kind of the science of money, but Morgan Housel's book, The Psychology of Money, I think is a great book to just develop good thinking and some foundational principles around how money and personal finance, works in today's environment.
What was the last one you'd said? The
Psychology of Money.
I think that's going to be the next one on my list. That sounds like one I'm sure we got it at the library at the house.
We do, because I can't remember if I'm the one that told you about that book, but I can tell you why I would think it would be that way. Where I was told about that book was when I spent time, my first time to my knowledge, and maybe my only time, on a trip with a billionaire. And I asked him what books he would recommend, and that was on his list. We know who that is, and I don't want to expose him on that on our channel here, but I just would say that had a great impact. So that's something he shared with me. I would also, to parlay off what John had said a little earlier, I would say that 97% of my deals I go into with a long-term mentality, with the willingness to be short-term and adapt to the needs. What needs am I referring to? That long-term thinking, and I would call it life by design. So we preach lifestyle freedom. What is lifestyle freedom? It's having designed your life in such a way that you can live and do it the way you believe it ought to be done. What is the enjoyable thing and way for you to live your life? If you don't have a plan for your life, you're working for someone who does. When talking about delivering value, Jim Rohn says it this way: always do more than you're paid for to invest in your future. Always doing the extra thing to make an extra impact. You know, you can open the door for someone. That's great. But how about open the door, smile at them, and tell them something that's, their eyes are beautiful. You know, genuine and sincere, but doing that extra thing.
2 more questions. One being, what do you see as the most exciting opportunities for growth and innovation in the rural market in the coming years?
So I'm excited about this area in general. I think that this is an emerging asset class, if you will. Mm-hmm. I think specifically West Tennessee is an emerging market for property and business and investing, for all the factors that we've talked about, including population growth and enhanced commerce and everything that's coming into this area. Yeah, I would simply say that's an exciting area,
especially with these plants coming in and all of the supporting around those. I'm excited to see what this town will look like in 10 years.
That's in our area particularly, but as it would apply to throughout the country or even the world, the advantages that are being given because of satellites, internet technology, and the ability to communicate. And the information is no good if it's not acquired, assembled, and then applied. I believe that's the definition of wisdom. Frankly, it's acquiring knowledge, assembling that knowledge into a package, and then applying it in your life. It's not so fast-paced, hard-nosed. With the rural market, you have the ability to have more freedoms to design it your way because of the advantages that we now have through technology.
There's also more opportunities for entry in a rural community.
That's right.
Right? You know, the barriers to entry are lesser typically. The price points are lower. It's a simpler environment, I would say, to invest in. There's not as much complexity as compared to some of the more, urban markets. So that's exciting to me as well.
And then lastly, just to finish up with the normal last interview question, looking back, what piece of advice would you give your younger self about navigating the investing world and why?
As I answer that, I would just like to thank Rural Empires and the professionals here for having me on today. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm a yes man. I like to put myself in situations like this, so I appreciate the opportunity and allowing me to share a little bit. As far as looking back and piece of advice, just get started. Just get going. The months pass by really fast. Every first of the month when you get some rent checks rolling in, I'm just reminded of how quick every 30-day interval just passes. Time is very fleeting. And I see investors that sit idle for years, some decades, and they never pull the trigger.
Potential investors.
Pull the trigger. Do something. If you fail, you were on a course to fail anyway if you're not investing. So you might as well do it big. just get started, whether it's that first $50 into a tax-free Roth IRA, or it's setting aside $1,000 to go into your first duplex, or that first live in and then eventually rent scenario to buy that house. Do something. Do what it takes. Sacrifice as much as it takes to get something going, because time, it goes by really fast.
And I would like to thank you on behalf of Rural Empires coming in. I know I've been incredibly blessed to watch John come into our more specific local rural area. And we've gone from meeting because his wife saw something on, I can't remember if it's Yahoo or
Yelp.
That's right. I didn't even know I had something on Yelp. I don't even know if I knew how to turn on a computer during that time. But now we're best friends, brothers, lovers of the Lord, neighbors, mentors to one another, all of those things. And those happened because I was investing and he was looking at investing, and what a wonderful and robust relationship. We're grateful for how that has molded and shaped our lives, the lives of our family, the lives of our generations. That's such an exciting statement that we're making. It's exciting to think about the decisions we're making. We can see how that they will affect our children and even our children's children. And he hit the nail on the head. The one thing that I have found in my 2 decades of being in business and in real estate, the number one thing I hear from those who have had great success, what's the one thing you wish you would do differently? And they say, start earlier. I wish I would have started earlier. And then the next thing is how that John brings forth about thinking long term. The irony of that statement is, if you didn't catch it, it's how short long term really is. When we think about 3 years and 5 years and 10 years, and then I can be with one of my maintenance guys or somewhere, John, we'll be riding around and I'll drive by a property and I'll look over there and, I'll be like, oh, that property right there. And then I'll remember I own it, which is an incredible. Now that might show a little bit of weakness on a lack of prudence and diligence on looking over that portfolio, but what a blessing that is to see both sides of that coin, and then be with a maintenance guy and be like, hey, we hadn't had a repair on that one. I think I've had that house 2 years. Like, Josh, you've had that 10 years. And that's how fast, we blink and then 10 years has gone by, and what seemed like a year would be so long, or having to wait that out, that long-term investment that you're making that says it'll take 10 years. And you think that's so far in the future, there's no great gratification. But then all of a sudden 10 years has gone by, and, there's a reaping that comes. That harvest is coming in, and there's a reaping of those fruits of the labor that you put in when you were sick in your stomach, thinking, oh my goodness, I'm about to sign this note on this loan and I don't have $50,000. And then you look up in 10 years and that thing's paid for and throwing you off $1,000 a month cash flow as you're getting ready to sign your, $1 million document loan. And you're like, oh, and it's so much easy. It still gives you somewhat of a feeling in your stomach, but how much you're strengthened to do that next deal now, because now you've had that decade go by and you've seen those multitudes of other deals that have processed throughout your investment time and in your career. And so with that, again, I just want to thank you so much for your time, for what you mean to my life and to the life of my son. I do take great appreciation for those that participate in with Harrison and with Adam. because we need those different perspectives coming from those different backgrounds, those different mindsets. We need diversity of thought. Never be afraid to be challenged and have your thought processes challenged. That's how we grow. Eat the chicken and throw away the bones.
I appreciate you letting me ask these questions, because again, when we come up with these questions, me and Harrison, we sit down and we're like, what are we struggling with right now? What are we trying to focus on? How do we want to grow? What about this? And just bouncing those ideas off of each other. So love hearing your side of it, and appreciate you letting me ask these questions. I hope that the rest of y'all have gotten as much out of it as I have. I mean, I'm motivated, ready to go, getting my first, ready to get the first deal done. And how about that? Right. So, like we said, thank you for joining us here on the channel, and hope to see you again next time. Thanks.